Hello everybody, I am Jarrett Ross of GeneaVlogger and welcome back to another Professional Genealogist Reacts. On today's video, I will be reacting to I took 5 DNA tests and compared them, which one is best, by UsefulCharts. But before we jump into the video, let's hear a word from the sponsor of today's video, The Genealogy Show. Whether you're an avid family history researcher or just getting started, tune in to the Genealogy Show 2021 virtual event from the 25th to the 26th of June. The Genealogy Show has created an immersive platform for you to enjoy over 48 hours straight of talks from industry leaders, all of which will be available for 30 days in the on-demand section. There's also a wide variety of globally recognized exhibitors, experts to help you in your research, and so much more. Pick up your tickets today and be sure to use code GeneaVlogger to get a discount on your tickets. You can get more information at www.thegenealogyshowlive.com or go down into the details for the links and more information. I am super excited for this video because, for one, I am friendly with Matt Baker, who runs UsefulCharts. We've collaborated a few times. I collaborated with him on his videos about Can You Trace Your Royal Family? We also collaborated with a genealogy collaboration where Matt actually went into his family tree, so I actually kind of know what to expect for him. Because he did have a video where he goes into the majority of his family tree, he basically broke it down that his family tree came from 3 different lines. One was a French-Canadian line. One was a German-Jewish line that moved to Canada that I think after a few generations ended up kind of, the family mostly became not Jewish. I don't know exactly. I want to say Christian, but I don't know if that's the proper terminology technically. And then I can't remember what the third line was for him. It's been a while since I've seen that video. I think maybe the third line for him was actually like German, or maybe it was a different kind of French-Canadian. I can't remember. But anyway, from what I knew in his family tree, he talks about a Jewish line. I don't know if that's going to show up in his DNA, though, because that line, his most recent fully Jewish ancestor, as far as I know, was a fairly distant, like, you know, great-great-great-great-grandparent of some sort. So if he does get Jewish, I would expect it to be like a trace result, just a couple of percentages. But being that he does 5 DNA tests, we're probably going to see a few of them, I think, pick it up, especially a lot of people say with MyHeritage, it almost always reads Jewish. With the French-Canadian, probably get like French, German. I wouldn't be surprised if with some sort of British Isles. So basically, I think he's going to get just a lot of different European, maybe a little bit of Jewish. I don't think he would get any sort of Asian ancestry. I don't think he's going to get any sort of African ancestry or Native American ancestry. But I guess, you know, we'll never know. We'll have to see. Now, with that said, be sure to like, also be sure to subscribe and hit that bell for notifications on future videos. But with all of that fun stuff said, let's go ahead and watch this video.
Hi, this is Matt Baker, and today I'm going to talk about DNA tests. I know that a lot of people who watch this channel are interested in genealogy and in building their own family trees. Well, nowadays, one of the things that can help you build your family tree is doing a DNA test. But there are a lot of different DNA tests out there. You see, I took 5 different DNA tests.
I have not done Circle, so I'm really excited for those results.
And in this video, I'm going to compare them and show you what the results look like for each one. The 5 kits I'm going to review are Circle DNA, Family Tree DNA, Ancestry.com, 23andMe, and MyHeritage. And I'm going to talk about them in order of price, from the most expensive to the least expensive. So up first is Circle DNA. Their basic service costs $189. Note that I'll be using US dollars throughout. Their premium service costs $629. So yeah, that's pretty expensive. But keep in mind that you get what you pay for. Circle DNA is primarily focused on health-related information, and in that regard, it definitely gives you the most detailed health information of any DNA kit that I've tried.
Now, I actually don't know a whole lot about Circle. I have heard of it, but just from my standpoint, I am curious what kind of testing they're doing. If what they're doing is just what's known as autosomal SNP testing, so that's what you'll get if you do Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, MyHeritage, and then Family Finder at Family Tree DNA. Those are all autosomal SNP tests. But some companies like Family Tree DNA, they have mitochondrial and Y-DNA testing. And then Y-DNA testing, there's other options for that. So you can do STR testing, where they're testing certain short tandem repeats. Or you can do the more advanced testing, which requires to basically do the STR testing anyway, SNP testing. So that's single nucleotide polymorphism. So it's basically a lot of fancy words for the way that they can tell specific stuff about the DNA, the specific mutations. The other thing is that other than autosomal SNP testing, there's also whole genome sequencing. And I am curious, I wonder if Circle does some form of whole genome sequencing. But I wonder that because it's $629, that makes me think that maybe one of the things they offer is whole genome. But I guess we'll have to see. Let's see what he says.
In fact, they market themselves as the world's most comprehensive DNA test. Also, keep in mind that all of these companies tend to offer discounts around holidays, such as Mother's Day, Christmas, etc. So you can usually get 30 to 40% off if you time things right. Okay, let's now take a look at the results that Circle DNA sent me. I took the premium version, so there's a lot to go through.
Okay, now I guess we'll have to find out, but I'm wondering, is Circle DNA offering any sort of genealogical information, or is it just all health? Let's do a look. So let's see. Circle DNA. Our science. Nice. Lab. Okay, so whole exome sequencing. They're doing it at 50x. All right. So it's definitely more in-depth testing, which usually for health testing, like if you go to an actual genetic counselor, geneticist, or, what you should do if you're trying to get true medical information by DNA testing, usually those tests I think are at 100x reading. So it's like how many times they go through and try to read the different stuff. So it doesn't seem like they're really giving genealogical information. Now I understand probably why I haven't really looked much into it. But let's continue with the video.
First of all, the really serious stuff. Circle DNA checked my health risk for 36 hereditary cancers, as well as 79 other conditions. This is just a partial report. Finally, there was an Ancestry report.
Okay, there is an admixture.
And from what I can see, not very accurate. Like I said, Circle DNA is primarily focused on
extremely broad. I mean, European, Southern European, Northwestern European, Eastern European, Northern European. I mean, yeah, they basically say he's from all over Europe.
Health, not genealogy. Okay, however, the rest of the kits we're going to look at are primarily focused on genealogy. And next up is Family Tree DNA. They too use the swab method. At first glance, their price at $80 for a basic test seems quite cheap, but that's because they separate out their more detailed reports, which cost extra. And it's at this point that I should probably explain some important terms. Autosomal DNA, mitochondrial DNA, and Y chromosome DNA.
Yeah, he called it Y chromosome DNA. I know there's a few genetic genealogists out there who hate when people call it just Y DNA. And they're like, it's the Y chromosome. It's not Y DNA. And so like, I know I've heard that pet peeve from some. So I like that Matt used it Y chromosome DNA here. I try to say it, but it's just easier to say Y DNA.
DNA is the kind of DNA that you're most likely familiar with. It's the DNA that is approximately 50% from your mother and 50% from your father. So, testing your autosomal DNA gives you information about your entire family tree as a whole. So, for example, unless you're a Habsburg, you probably have 16 great-grandparents, each of which contributed, on average, about 6% of your DNA. Now, the exact amount can actually be quite different, which is why a DNA test comes in handy. For many people, like myself, their ancestors came from a variety of different places. So an autosomal test can give you an approximate breakdown of where those ancestors came from. So here's what my ancestry report from Family Tree DNA looks like. You can see that it is more detailed than the one from Circle DNA. And once again, the results seem a bit off. Way more Eastern European than I would expect, which just goes to show that these composition estimates are just that.
Yeah, his Eastern European's adding up to 21%, which would be the equivalent, if it's coming from one recent ancestor, it'd be the equivalent of a grandparent. Just because with DNA recombination, it's not always exact. You get 50% from your parents, but then from that breakdown, you might get 27% from one grandparent and 23% from another grandparent. So it's not exactly even. So getting 21% could just all be from a grandparent, especially because that grandparent might be mostly Eastern European with a little bit of Western thrown in or something. But then again, this also might be a little off when it comes to reading this stuff. It's not always exact. But then again, sometimes it may be right and there might be an NPE, a non-paternity event or non-paternal event. There's a few different ways to say it. Basically, it's just there's someone in your ancestry that isn't actually your ancestor. So going through the paper trail, somebody's dad wasn't truly their biological dad or something like that. And so that could be the case. The other case is for a lot of people too, although I think Matt's tree is traced out really well, but for a lot of people, their tree is only traced out to like great-grandparents or second great-grandparents. And so there might be different ancestral things going on that they don't even know about just because they don't have the information on that one generation. So yeah, but let's continue.
They are estimates, and each company comes up with their estimates in slightly different ways. Now, I want to point out the other thing that an autosomal test can do, which Family Tree DNA provides, but Circle DNA does not. And that is
genetic matches. Yes! So, Matt, you're the man. Love it. Okay, sweet. Let's go back a little bit.
And that is to provide...
Okay, so looking at his genetic matches. All right, we have a first cousin, aunt, niece, 780 shared centimorgans. So looking at all of this, so what it is, you know, they're giving a relationship range, an estimate of how closely is that person related based on how much DNA they share. So this woman shares 780 centimorgans with Matt. 81 is the longest block. So they have one big shared segment that's 81 centimorgans. So X match, that means that there's no shared DNA through their X chromosome. If they did link each other, so linked relationships, if you're on Family Tree DNA, you can make a family tree on there and then link the people that you know how they're related. And then what it will do is it will actually start, technically it's called phasing, but it will start to divvy up your matches based on if they're through your mom's side or your dad's side. Because, so let's say it's his dad's sister. He puts that in the family tree on Family Tree DNA, links her. Then when he comes back, all the matches that he shares with her will also be indicating that they come from his paternal side, because if he shares those matches with her, presumably they would also be through the father's side. Now, there are issues with endogamy, which Matt would actually experience, because Matt comes from French Canadian ancestry. French Canadians practiced endogamy, which is basically that everyone within that community kept marrying only other people within that community. And what happens is then all of the people who descend from that one community will be related to everybody else from that community in multiple ways. So it's actually not surprising looking at his matches. A lot of people may be surprised that he has so many matches over 100, whereas a lot of people out there may be getting matches where their best one is like 130 centimorgans, and then everything else is like 80 and below. Well, when you deal with an endogamous population and you come from that, you're related in multiple ways. So if you're a third cousin to someone and you're also a fourth cousin to someone, that DNA adds up to a higher total shared amount than you would have for a third cousin or a fourth cousin. And this would then guess that there may be a second cousin. So like these second to third cousins that he has down here that I'm circling around, they may actually be fourth cousins or fifth cousins to him in their closest relation, but because they're related in multiple ways, thus they are having a higher total amount of shared DNA. And then here for this second match, you see how it says X match. That means that he is sharing DNA on his X chromosome with this Stockman. And that means that if he's trying to figure out how they're related and he does not know, then he can know that he can rule out any lines where he's not going to get his X chromosome. So he does not inherit men do not inherit an X chromosome from their father. They get the Y chromosome. So that means that because she's a match with an X chromosome, he knows that she's not from his dad's side. So if you're an adoptee trying to find your family and you get an X match and you're a male, then you may you're going to easily be able to know, okay, that match is going to be through my mom's side because men only get their X chromosome from their mother. Let's just continue watching. I'm so excited he's showing matches.
So this report shows you other people and it ranks them according to the closeness of the relationship. This is where things get interesting.
Now, I also want to point out, if you come from an endogamous population, you're trying to figure out, how am I going to find the matches that are worth looking into? Because endogamous matches means that you have a lot of matches that you're not going to really be able to find how you're related because it's more distant than it looks. Well, to figure that out, look at the longest shared DNA. Like you notice how these two have 95 and 94 total, but they only have 17 for their longest. I would not focus on them, and I would more focus on these two down here where they have a 33 and a 28 centimorgan longest segment, because the further distant related that you are, every generation DNA recombines. So if you're related to someone in multiple ways, you're going to share more total DNA, but all of those segments that you share are going to be smaller than you would expect for that amount. When you look at all the segments, it's going to look a lot smaller than if you look at like a true second cousin. So yeah, so excited he's showing this.
You can then reach out to each person and try to figure out how exactly you are related. Let me now explain the other two types of DNA, starting with mitochondrial DNA. Inside every cell in your body are cell parts called mitochondria. And those mitochondria have DNA that is totally different from your main DNA, which is stored in the nucleus. It's different because 100% of your mitochondrial DNA comes from your mother. In other words, your mitochondria is the same as your mother's mitochondria, which is the same as her mother's mitochondria, etc., etc. So a mitochondrial DNA test can tell you information about only a very small section of your family tree, your matrilineal line. But unlike an autosomal test, it can tell you information that goes back much farther in history, like tens of thousands of years far.
Yeah.
This is because, like I say, mitochondrial DNA basically never changes. It only changes in the rare case of a mutation, and major mutations only happen every few thousand years. So this means that if person A has a certain mutation and person B has the exact same mutation, we can know that they share the same matrilineal line. These lines are called haplogroups and are labeled with alphabetic codes. Yep. My haplogroup is called U. And Family Tree DNA provides me with a map that shows where my line broke off from the main branch.
I'm H1AI1, which there's another famous genealogist who's H1AI1, and that's Megan Smoleniak, although we come from very different matrilineal type lines. I come from a Jewish line that traces to Ukraine, or present day Ukraine, Poland. She comes from a line that I believe traces to Ireland. So, you know, somewhere in the past couple thousand years, we were related. Only one genetic difference for those who know the in-depth stuff for mitochondrial. We both tested full region. Only one genetic difference, meaning one variation in our reading was different.
Finally, there is Y DNA. Y DNA is kind of the opposite of mitochondrial DNA in that it only gives you information about your father and your father's father and so on. Yep. And I should point out, this test is only available to males.
Yep.
In my case, I belong to group RM343, also known as R1b, which happens to be by far the most common haplogroup in Europe. Okay, so remember that $80 I mentioned earlier? That gives you autosomal results only. If you want a mitochondrial test, it's $160 extra. And if you want Y-DNA, it's $120 extra. So $360 for all three.
And there's actually different levels of testing for mitochondrial and Y. I think for mitochondrial, though, they might have stopped doing the multiple test levels. But for Y-DNA tests, there's YSTR tests, which I believe it starts at Y67, meaning they're going to read 67 STR markers. And then it goes up from there. There's like Y111, Y300, Y600, or maybe it just goes to big Y. And then there's you can get into SNP testing for Y DNA, Y chromosome DNA, and you can either buy SNP packages, you can test single SNPs, and basically that will tell you a more defined haplogroup for patrilineal. So I did a whole genome sequence. This is my most defined haplogroup, JBY55410. That's me, my ancestry tracing to Ukraine on my paternal line. So me and this guy, where his paternal line traces to Lithuania, we have a common ancestor up our purely paternal line. So the most recent common ancestor could be anywhere from like 350 years to 1,250 years. And then that SNP could actually have formed sometime in the past 1,100 to 2,200 years. This is going up the line. So if you notice how in his, it traces back and it goes up the dots. And so basically when we're looking at this, it's the same thing. So this is going back another, and all of these people, we all share an ancestor where this is a mutation and it formed about 5,300 years ago. And then you can see all the countries. So pretty much everyone here, they come from a Jewish family that, you know, Hungary, Romanian, Ukrainian, Russian, Lithuanian, Ukrainian, and then we can go back further. And then we notice the next closest is Qatar, because Jews came from the Middle East. And so our closest relatives also live in the Middle East. We take it back another, and then all of a sudden we see Saudi Arabia. We take it back another, we get Iraq, then we get Libya in North Africa, we have Saudi Arabia, and then we take it back another, and then we have all over the place, Libya, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, all of ours. Then we have these where it's Italian, Syrian, Armenian, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and then we get a ton of Palestinian, and it's you can really tell the history. So all of these people, all of us, if we trace up our paternal line somewhere 14,000 years ago, we will find a common ancestor up our purely paternal line.
But again, you get what you pay for.
Yeah, you get a lot more.
What sets family tree DNA apart is that it gives you way more information on the various mutations in your mitochondrial and Y DNA.
And your genetic matches.
This is where it gets way over my head, which leads me to the point I want to make about this test. This is a test that I would recommend primarily for those at the expert level of genetic genealogy.
I'd say intermediate. I mean, intermediate could definitely make use of it. The difficulty with it is just that it's a little bit harder to read. It takes a little bit longer to kind of figure out. And its genealogical usage, it's low, because it's kind of a game of luck of, who's tested. It's just like the autosomal tests. Like if you're trying to find family and you're trying to find genetic matches, it depends on who's tested. And it's the same thing with the Y and mitochondrial. The only difference is a lot fewer people have done that kind of testing, so you get a lot fewer results. And there's a higher chance that you're not going to really get anything out of it genealogically than with autosomal. But it can be amazing, and they've used it. I think they used it to confirm the remains of King Richard III.
23andMe is unique in that it offers both genealogy and health reports. If you want just the genealogy stuff, it's $100. But if you want both, it's $200. And be prepared to spit into a tube. On the genealogy side, it's pretty similar to Family Tree DNA.
Yeah.
They offer an ethnicity estimate as well as a list of relative matches. However, one thing to note about 23andMe is that they do give you your haplogroup results at no extra charge.
But the difference is it's not matching like Family Tree DNA. They're doing a much smaller reading, and so you're also getting less of a defined haplogroup. So for me, on Family Tree DNA, they define me as JM172, which is also called J2, whereas testing through 23andMe, I haven't done it yet. I need to actually do it, although I don't really technically need to. I have it covered. But anyway, they would probably just call me J, I would expect. I would be doubtful that they would give me like a J2 or, anything more specific than J.
I'm not going to go into any more detail about 23andMe because I did an entire video on my results back in 2019. So I'll just leave a link to that in the description.
I actually don't remember seeing that, so I am going to have to go and watch that as well and do a reaction.
Next up is Ancestry.com. Their basic test also goes for $100 and uses the spit method. And unlike 23andMe, it doesn't give you haplogroup information either. But of course, it does give you a breakdown of where your ancestors came from. And this is where Ancestry really stands out because their ethnicity report is much more detailed. So you can see here that, for me, they not only break down European ethnicities into finer categories, they are also able to predict which North American settler communities my ancestors belong to.
Yeah.
And from what I know of my family tree, they seem to have things spot on. I know that most of my ancestors came from Germany, England, and Ireland, and settled in Nova Scotia. And this is indeed what the results show. So because Ancestry is basing their results on such a large database of people who, like me, live in North America, I would lean towards saying that these particular ethnicity results are probably the most accurate, for me anyway, of the 5 tests that I've taken.
Yeah, the Ancestry database is the largest, and the majority of the database, I would say, come from English-speaking countries, at least as from my experience. Because Ancestry, there's like 4 main Ancestry sites. There's Ancestry US, Ancestry Canada, Ancestry UK, and then Ancestry AU, Australia and New Zealand. I don't think there's an Australia NZ specifically for New Zealand. I think it's just lumped in with Ancestry Australia. I don't know if there's others, but like for MyHeritage, they have distribution centers elsewhere in the world. So like MyHeritage, they don't have as large a database as Ancestry, but I believe they have a larger amount of people from Eastern Europe who've tested, and I believe they have a larger amount of people from like South and Central America who have tested, whereas Ancestry, even though they are a larger database, their database doesn't really represent those communities as well.
When it comes to relative matches, once again, Ancestry really stands out because of their very large database.
But they recently changed the formatting of the page, and I hate it. Because like I said, when it comes to endogamous populations, which I come from an endogamous population, It's easy to figure out the best matches to look into using the total amount of centimorgans and either the largest segment or the number of segments. And they used to show the total amount of centimorgans, which we see here right there, and then where this 14% shared DNA is, it used to be total segments. And now they've just changed it to the percentage view, which I think it doesn't make sense to me other than it's showing, okay, people who prefer percentage, which I think is very few and far between. I wish they would bring it back to show that that number of segments, because for people like me dealing with those endogamous populations, it really streamlines being able to figure out which matches are the best. The way they have it now, I have to click on every single match to look and see, whereas before I could just scroll and pass through, all the, people that were like, 87 centimorgans across 10 segments. Like, I could be like, okay, well, those aren't really as important. Whereas if I find someone with like 80 centimorgans across 5 segments, that's going to be a match I want to look into.
So if your main goal is to find relatives and you're from North America, then Ancestry is probably the best place to start.
Yeah. I would redefine that as if you come from any English-speaking countries. North America, the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and then England, British Isles, Ireland, Scotland. You're going to have a lot of representation on this database, because a lot of those countries have a lot of people who've tested at Ancestry. But you do also get a lot of Europeans and others too.
However, I should point out that if you do any of these tests, you should be prepared for the possibility of uncovering surprises. Finally, the other great thing about Ancestry is that their website is specifically designed for helping you build your family tree.
Yeah.
It has an amazing, easy-to-use interface. Plus, it offers you access to millions of online records.
If you have the membership.
Access to all those records, you do have to sign up for a monthly membership, which costs around $25 per month. Okay, the final test that I took was from MyHeritage, which uses the swab method. MyHeritage is a lot like Ancestry. However, at $80, they hold the distinction of being the least expensive test on the market. And if you wait for one of their sales, you can usually take the test for even less. Here is what my results from MyHeritage look like. Again,
okay,
it shows that
he didn't get any Jewish reading. All right, I thought if any of them had picked up any of that Jewish, it probably would be MyHeritage. Although from all the reading, I'm guessing he did not inherit any of that Jewish ancestry. But like I said, that was, from what I could tell, I think it was really distant. Like his most recent fully Jewish ancestor would have been born in the 1700s, I think it was, maybe the 1600s. So 4th, 5th, 6th great grandparent. And, at that amount, it's very common not to inherit DNA from that person, even though they are an actual ancestor of yours.
my ancestors mostly came from Germany, England, and Ireland. At this point, I want to give you a bit of a conclusion. I can't really say which of the 5 tests I tried is the best for you, because that really depends on your situation and interests.
Very true.
If you're primarily interested in health information and have money to spend, then I'd say that CircleDNA is hands down your best option. However, if it's genealogy that you're most interested in, there's a few more questions to consider. If you're an expert and want really detailed mitochondrial and Y-DNA reports,
tested all of them.
and once again,
whole genome sequencing,
then you'll definitely want to go with family tree DNA. However, if you're more of an average person and simply want to spend about $100 on a simple test, you'll want to go with either MyHeritage or Ancestry. I'd recommend MyHeritage for anyone who is Jewish or lives outside of North America, and I'd recommend Ancestry for those in the US or Canada. Finally, if you want a bit of both health info and genealogy info, or you want to find out your haplogroups without breaking the bank, I'd say that you can't go wrong with 23andMe. Okay, so that was a look at some of the DNA tests out there. You can find a link to all of these tests, as well as a few discount codes in the description.
Yeah, just look in my description below. Although I don't have circle down there.
And if you have taken more than one test, let me know in the comments which one you thought was best and why. Thanks for watching.
All right. Great video. I mean, I wasn't expecting anything bad from Matt. He is a smart guy. He has a great channel. If anyone watching my channel has not seen Useful Charts, check it out. It's super interesting. And I would bet that you've probably seen one of his videos, even if you don't remember that it was one of his. One thing I do want to say, like at the end where he's kind of breaking down what test you want to take. And people ask me that all the time. What's the best test? Personally, if you are into genealogy and money is not an issue, test on all of them. I think what most people usually say is do the test on either Ancestry or 23andMe, then you can upload it for free to the Family Tree DNA database and the MyHeritage database for genetic matching. Plus there's GEDmatch, Living DNA, GenieNet, Genie, all these other places to upload it. 23andMe doesn't allow uploads, but then to also test that, pay to test there. Personally, I would say Ancestry over 23andMe. 23andMe does have genealogy stuff, but they recently did a whole thing where they put more tools behind the paywall. And then they also cut out a lot of matches, and they did a whole lot of stuff that a lot of people in the genealogy community weren't the happiest about. But they are a very large database. Ancestry is the largest database. So Matt was saying if you're Jewish, you should test at MyHeritage. Which if you're really interested in the admixture stuff and trying to figure out, do you have Sephardi or Mizrahi or something like that? Yeah, maybe MyHeritage might be a good choice. But if it's just for looking for matches, MyHeritage and Ancestry are pretty good. But I would also say too, if you are really into the genealogy stuff and you really want to find out the health stuff, I know his video is about Circle, but I would suggest checking out my video about nebula whole genome sequencing, because whole genome sequencing gives you a lot. It does your whole genome, and then it gives you a lot of information on the health stuff. It constantly puts new studies out, and it gives you the most in-depth look at your DNA by far. Just watch my video and you'll see everything I go into. And they plan to eventually do some sort of collaboration with Family Tree DNA, but that still has yet to happen, although they recently did finalize a thing with YFull, which is now active. But overall, I would say this was a great video. I do kind of find it funny. He didn't really spend a whole lot of time going into the actual, here's the admixture. He does talk about it for the most part. And, he has done a lot of genealogy research on his own family. And so, he really understands the power of these tests beyond just the admixture. And I'm so happy, so happy. Thank you so much, Matt, for showing your genetic matches and talking about how you even were able to find this first cousin from Ancestry that you knew nothing about previously. So awesome video. So happy I watched it. This one, came out May 28th. I'm watching this. Today's June 5th. So just last week, as soon as it came out, I put it in my watch list, and I've gotten probably a dozen, maybe even more comments and things saying I should watch it. And I knew I had to. Well, thank you so much for checking out this video. If you did enjoy, please be sure to give it a like. That really does help me out. You can also subscribe by clicking right here. It is completely free to do so. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at GeneaVlogger. I'm the GeneaVlogger. See you in my next video.